specify, or I specifically focus on design activities. And one of the activities that I am extremely passionate about and one that I spend a lot of time on is the design sprint. How many people here know what a design sprint is, just so I can cater to the audience? One who knows what a design sprint is? Perfect. Okay. So I want to actually hear from you guys. Raise your hand if you can tell me what good design is. Yes.
The one that communicate better.
Yes. Communicates better. Yes.
Yeah, the one that the functionality and it works and it's beauty. It
Works.
beauty on it.
Beautiful.
A good design must be intuitive.
Intuitive. I love it.
The one that is centered in the user.
Centered in the user. You guys are excellent. Yes.
The one that's useful for the client and also is simple.
Simple. These are absolutely fantastic answers because a lot of times good design can be confused with just beauty. But in fact, the beauty serves a purpose. It's appealing to the user. So good design is the same as good user experience, or it should be. You should be focusing on designing something in order to create an incredible user experience. And we care about that. Pretty simply, if our user's happy, we're happy. We're solving problems. The only reason that we're creating products, sometimes you create products because it's fun, but most of the time you're creating a solution to a problem. So the design sprint is a highly collaborative tool, or it's a tool, it's an extremely powerful tool to improve collaboration within your team and then also to help you validate your concept for your design in less than a week. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the framework that we use at Google. Google did not invent design thinking, the design sprint. This is all, there's a lot of different formats, there's a lot of different techniques. But the point of the sprint is to focus on the user, to build something that solves a problem, and then to be able to validate it within a very short period of time. That's where the sprint piece comes into play. So this is the model that we follow, and it has 6 steps. You can see it sometimes in 6 steps, sometimes you see it in 4 steps, sometimes you see it in 3 steps. You'll have different ways of breaking this out, but the point is that there's a diverging and a converging moment, which means that you're able to allow your team to go big, and you allow your team to feel like you're being productive by coming back to the point. We go through 6 phases, and I'm going to give you a couple of stories for each phase that hopefully highlights the value of why each of these different design thinking techniques are put together into the design sprint format. Also, we're running I'm not sure if I need to explain the value of creating something ahead of time and to be validating the concept early on, but we were running a paper prototyping workshop at Google I/O earlier this year, and afterwards I was talking to one of the developers who took the workshop. It was a 1-hour workshop, and all we did was take some time to think through the entire user journey of what we were trying to build, put it together and start to play with it in a paper prototype. And by the end of that, he told me, and I don't know how many people have spent 3 months or 6 months on a project only to realize that you were building the wrong solution, but he said that he usually spends about 3 to 6 months developing and then undeveloping his product. And that by spending 1 hour of thinking through the entire thing, he was able to probably cut out about 2 months of development time so that he could really focus on executing on that vision. So the understand phase. The key point here is for everybody to understand that you are not the user. We are users of our own product a lot of the time. We're trying to solve a problem we've experienced, but we know too much about our product in order for us to be able to be completely unbiased. So what happens with our mind is that we'll end up filling in the gaps where somebody else will get confused or lost. So that is the critical part of the understand phase, is that we need to get outside of us assuming that we know the answer and realize that we need to search for the answer from somebody else. So I'm going to tell a story, and this is a slightly embarrassing story actually, because I love to travel and I also love to help people to a fault. I sometimes think that I know the answers, that I've had some really great experiences and that I can bring these things to people. And I was given an opportunity to travel to Rwanda in 2012. And when I got there, I knew that I wanted it, actually it was before I got there, I knew that I wanted to make the trip really worthwhile. So I was a mentor at a program called the Sherry Blair Foundation. Really phenomenal program for women entrepreneurs, had a huge network, and I was able to find 50 women in Rwanda who wanted to do this meetup. So I organized the meetup, and I actually found a really phenomenal speaker who had founded a graphic design academy in Kigali, which is the capital city. He was formerly of George Lucas Films. He was a really phenomenal graphic designer, and he dialed in from CES. So he wasn't there at the time, but he did have a house there, and he was opening his doors to his academy. Super proud moment for me. And I came in, and I had my guest speaker, and I had my insights from Silicon Valley about how to be an entrepreneur. And after about 30 minutes, 40 minutes of talking to the community, one woman stood up very respectfully and she said, "You realize that legally, culturally, and personally, nothing that you've said applies to what we're doing." And I actually afterwards found out that this woman had founded 2 companies. She was an extremely successful entrepreneur, and I had come with these naive hopes that I had some insight to bestow, that I had understood what the problem was, and here's the solution that I'm going to bring from San Francisco. I should have ended up asking her to do the entire thing. And so from that point, we ended up having a group discussion and leveraging the expertise within the group. So a couple of techniques that we use within the understand phase, bringing it back to product design. You can either do lightning talks within your team, because as we saw in here, we have a whole bunch of different perspectives and points of view, from the business perspective, from the product and technical perspective, from the user research perspective. All of these insights need to be combined to create the final product. Then we also need to have user research, or we can have user interviews. Any insight that we can get to make our perspective or our decision more complete is what we're going to be producing in this understand phase. Then the next step is the define phase. There's going to be, if you go to developers.google.com, you'll see that there's 2 different kinds of sprints. I'm talking right now about a product sprint, which means that from scratch, you're creating a product from scratch, or you are trying to change the product and overcome a hurdle. Now there's another type of design sprint that is called new form factors. This is on the developers.google.com website. And that one's just addressing making your mobile app be compatible with Wear, or making it more material design, slightly adjust the current form that it exists in. That doesn't really need a defined phase. It's kind of predefined for you, if that makes sense. Your goal is to make it applicable to Wear. But when you don't have a very clear definition, you've just spent maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe half a day understanding how big the problem is. And how many people here, I don't know how many startups you've been talking to, but how many people have met the startup that's trying to build the everything app? Do you know what that is? Where they understand that the problem is so big and that their technology is so unique that they are going to solve it all. And I actually had a friend, it was a pitch contest back in San Francisco, and he had built a vendor database. Now I have a background in software localization, so translation requires vendors. And to manage that database and make sure that it was the quality and caliber and the process payments and the workflow, all of that was met the needs of that industry, we needed an entire tool dedicated solely to that. So if you create a product that actually solves everything, you're going to be going up against the Ubers, the Airbnbs of the world, where you're going to be focusing on everything just a little bit, where they've put all of their investment into that one problem. So the point that I want to leave here is focus, focus, focus. And a couple of activities that we do to better understand this is we shorten our focus. We narrow what we're going to be looking at. So part of that, we can use the user journey, and we can start to look at pain points. The specific activity would be to set up a very simple user journey. Pick the beginning, the end, and a couple of key milestones as you're going through, and then highlight the pain points. What are some of the challenges that we've seen based on data, based on the understand phase? And then focus on one for the sprint. Don't try to tackle all your problems at once. Another technique that's very common is to develop a challenge statement. So you have something that's very specific that covers the what, the for whom. Always think about the person you're developing for, and why. So if you just say, I'm going to be working on fixing this, I'm going to be working on fixing the onboarding process of my app because we've had some data that is a problem. Well, that's great. That's a very big issue, though. Who is having trouble with that? Is it every user? Is it a student between the ages of 18 and 21 who's using your app while they're walking to the university? Or is it a mother who is picking up her children from work? They all have different needs. You need to understand why you're solving the problem that you're solving. The next phase is the most fun phase. And I have a whole bunch of Post-its out, and I hope that we have time to do the activity, because this is one of the activities that we do during Diverge. But the reason that this happens actually so late in the process is because our tendency is when we hear a problem, we immediately start trying to solve it. And we make a whole bunch of assumptions along the way. So I did this activity with a bunch of technical product managers at Google, and I had them try to solve a very busy intersection where there was a lot of people crossing the street illegally. So it's very dangerous. And I had them generate solutions for how they might solve this. People came up with solutions from removing cars to removing people. The people might be the problem. To what else did we have? I think that there was some sort of teleportation device that was in there. You know, moonshot thinking. Gotta always be thinking 10 steps ahead. And when I started asking them why were you generating these solutions, we started realizing that they were solving different problems. Some of them thought that the problem was that people were ignorant. Some of them thought that the problem was that cars were, people who were in cars were inconsiderate. Or some people thought that simply the design of the intersection was the problem. So if you're solving different problems, you're going to realize that you're going to be going all over the place. So you want to make sure that you're all taking time to understand and define your problem before you get to the solution stage. And that's a very, very hard thing to do. All teams want to rush ahead. So this is a lot of fun. It's an opportunity to dream. And we run design sprints at Google for Google X. So there was a vision sprint that was run, and I highly recommend the talk with Jake Knapp and Nadia Derekova from Google I/O 2014 that covers a couple of different design sprints that they've run. The self-driving car, before it even existed, they needed to have a vision sprint so that the whole team, which is an international team, could be all on the same page. The other key thing to note is that contrary to popular belief, group brainstorming doesn't work. It's fun, and discussions can be very productive, but they tend to not lead to a solution. How many people have been in a meeting where we've got a couple people who are probably in school, even in a classroom discussion. How many people have been in a discussion where you realize that every idea keeps getting argued and it goes higher and people are insulting people and you realize that the conversation's not going anywhere and you walk out of the room and nothing was decided? You've been personally offended. And the only person that won was the loudest person in the room because they always win. So what this phase is it's silent ideation. And that's really, really important. We want to have every single person in the room have an opportunity to share their perspective. In the decide phase, this is also really critical. So to that point about the meetings, when you walk out of a meeting and you didn't get to write out action item 1, 2, 3, I personally feel extremely frustrated because you just wasted an hour, if not 2, of my time, and all we did was talk. All we did was go around and around and around, and the same person who tends to say no, but that's not going to work, no, but that's not going to work, has crushed every single idea in the room. But we didn't get to any decisions because we didn't have a 100% unanimous vote. So this phase is done with Zen.voting. This is from IDEO. It's Zen because it's silent. Again, talking gets you into trouble, especially when the clock is ticking. These activities, by the way, they happen with a timer. So you feel the crunch. How many people have waited? Who's a procrastinator? Who waits until the absolute last minute? Yeah, that's this one right here. Time pressures give you a purpose and a lot of adrenaline to finish what you need to do. So you end up being more creative and more focused. So that's why we do this in such a short period of time. A couple other things that you'll see here is that we use dots. You can use markers if you don't have dots. But the point is that you want to have all of your ideas up on a wall. You circle them so you start to find commonalities between all of them so that you can sort of see where ideas are overlapping, get yourself organized, maybe even write in a title so you have a one-word summary. And then you can vote on ideas or you can vote on features. So there's 2 different types of ways to take notes. You can do it with words, or pictures are worth 1,000 words. So when you put your vote on it, make sure that you're thinking exactly what part of this idea do I really love. Because at the end, you want to take a little bit of everything. It's not going to be my idea won, your idea lost. You suck. So the final phase is the prototype phase. And for the developers in the room, have you ever been on a project after 3 months, 6 months, that got completely scrapped? Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
It depends. It's a crappy sensation, but really, like, if you know that the project is, if you know if the project is going down for any reason, it's like, you sound like, thank God. Thank God, the project is over and it's going nowhere. Like, why to keep going with that?
Yep.
That's the truth, really. Like,
Yeah.
You feel like that's going nowhere.
Yeah.
You're happy that it's ended.
Yeah.
That's happening.
Anybody else? So what if you could have that happy ending feeling before you even started putting in the code? The idea here is that you want to test the concept before you start testing the code. So if you create a prototype, and we've got a couple of recommended tools that you can use. You can use Keynote, is a really great way to create a semi-clickable prototype. It actually does a really great job of transitioning between screens as if it was real. And then you can use InVision. There's other software tools that help you take your high-fidelity mocks and you put them into a screen. And put a couple of links in there, and then you can have people click through. Now, sometimes people ask me, can you use paper prototyping for a design sprint? And I would say yes during the ideation phase, especially if you're doing a material design sprint. You want to be able to play with the layout and how it looks and kind of see how it feels. It's easier than drawing for some people. But I wouldn't recommend using that during the prototype phase. You need to get a high fidelity mock that is real enough to feel. So there's a couple of pieces that came up, which is the reason that design sprints are very effective, and they lend from a lot of concepts from agile development. But the problem with agile development is that even with this speed, iteration, feedback process, that you can still spend a lot of time on that build phase. So you get this really cool idea, but then you spend maybe 3-6 months building it, and then by that time you're kind of in love with the project. Or maybe you hate it and you're really grateful that it's over. But then you launch it, even if it's an MVP, an alpha, a beta, you launch it, and the feedback that you get, you're looking for some sort of validation that what you did was worth it. Finally, it comes back that there were either non-conclusive results or negative feedback that indicates you should probably go a different direction, but by that time you're just going to be iterating the feedback. You're not going to be throwing away the project. So try your best during the sprint to create something that is real enough to feel, but that doesn't take blood, sweat, and tears. So the process with the design sprint is that we skip the build and the launch phase, and we do it in a much safer environment to be constantly iterating. And this is the concept that Google Ventures has on their website as well. So the final phase, and this is actually the most important phase, arguably, is the validation phase. Again, if you skip this phase and so the design sprint, and I've run a lot of design sprints where we're doing it as a workshop, and we do end up skipping this phase because we weren't able to get any users in, or because we really were just trying to walk them through the workflow. And what happens is if you take the high fidelity mocks that you've just created, maybe you created a really cool idea, it only took you 8 hours, you really want to test it out, so you actually start integrating it into the app. And then you launch it to your users, and I've checked in a couple of times on people who have run a workshop design sprint with me, and after 3 months they still haven't launched it, and after 6 months they still haven't launched it, and I realized that they're putting a little bit too much effort and time into it. And by that point, there really isn't any turning back. They've invested too much blood, sweat, and tears. So for the validate phase, it's really, really important. Google Ventures has a phenomenal process to start looking for the person that you're going to be validating with at the beginning of the sprint or before the sprint, so that by the time you're running the sprint, this becomes your final deadline. So we ran a sprint actually last week for material design, and our final deadline was to validate it with the material design team up at Google headquarters. So the pressure was on. You need to come up with something that is going to both solve a user problem and impress the material design team. Having some sort of deadline is really, really important. So here we have a couple of resources. I've got 2 recommended videos. I put the short links in, but one of them is the one that I mentioned for Google I/O, Jake Knapp, Nadia Derekova, at Google I/O 2014, talking about design sprints. Really phenomenal. And then there's also another one by Jake Knapp. I think most of his videos, if you search for Jake Knapp, you can find a lot of his content or anything that's related to him. But he's got a lot of great video content as well. These are the Google Ventures design sprints, and up here we have content that's been created by our team, developer relations. Now the difference between these is these ones are full-fledged product sprints. You're solving a really, really big challenge. It's a 5-day sprint model. It's tried and true. This works just about every time. From testing a robot to testing a new web layout. So this model will work. But if you want to be experimenting with different activities and you want to figure out how to run a couple of different types of sprints, this one's a little bit more of a flexible format. We have the 2 different sprints that I mentioned at the beginning, the product sprint and the new form factors. But I hope that after this, it at least sparks some curiosity. Because my personal mission has become to bring design sprints to the world. And that might sound cheesy, it might sound corny, but I honestly think that from the moment that I was introduced to sprints, that it's the most powerful collaboration tool I've ever seen. And I'll use pieces of a sprint when I'm in meetings to help meetings go a little bit better. And I'll use, I just love seeing the results that we have from running the design sprints. So with that, so I did want to run a short activity. And this activity requires a challenge. So for a t-shirt, who can tell me an idea for a product or it could be, so one of the challenges that we had was the sidewalk challenge. How might we prevent jaywalking or illegal crossing of the street? Who wants to suggest a challenge? Could be something that could be solved by a technology. Yeah.
Planning the cooking for a week.
Perfect. Okay, so the question is, how might we use technology to help somebody, and who is this somebody?
Housewife. Somebody who lives by himself has to cook.
Someone who eats by themselves.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
That's
First of all, we have
delivery
a gift. Careful.